Welcome to Life Source Church. Subscribe to our podcast on iTunes or SoundCloud. Hey, welcome back to Life Source Church videocast, podcast. If you're listening on SoundCloud or iTunes, or you're viewing us on YouTube, or you may even found us in your newsfeed on Facebook if you're following us there. We're excited that you've joined us today again, Tuesday morning. We are doing what we're calling Monday morning quarterbacking, but we're carrying it over to Tuesday morning. So good Tuesday morning. We are going to be talking about the sermon that happened a couple days ago called Money Works, and it was titled Enjoying All of Your Money. So today, Pastor Walt joins me, the speaker and presenter for that sermon. And so I want to ask you a couple of questions. By the way, good morning.
Good morning, yeah.
And people that are viewing us on YouTube get to see, but we're still in our church Sunday best.
Right.
People online,
I wear it every day.
Yeah, we wear it every day. But so you talked about in your sermon enjoying all of your money, and you listed things that you might do throughout the day or throughout the week, and you created a list. And I'm curious, what would people find enjoyable about using their money in all those ways? Like, how is it really enjoyable to pay your bill?
That's a good question, right? Yeah, we don't always enjoy that. Well, the reality is this, is that our money, a lot of our money, we don't have much choice about, right? We do have to pay our bills. And if we're going to obey God, then we discover that we also have to give and should give and should want to give. And we do all that. And then we get the idea of enjoying our money doing something fun, going out to eat, going to play something somewhere, do something, watch a movie. But the way this works is that the reality is that whenever we align any part of our life with what God says in His Word, we experience joy there. We experience fulfillment because it's no longer just about me being what I want and happening right now. It's now that I'm doing something with God that's going to last forever. And that really starts to change your perspective on everything. And so the idea of giving, we can think, okay, yes, I should be joyful in my giving, and I give because it's going to do God's work. But really paying the bills is the same way. I'm sitting down here paying the bills, able to pay the bills, excited about that because God has given this to me. This is how He's feeding me. This is how He's clothing me. This is how He's keeping me warm. And even, so if I'm actually doing things the way God wants me to do with all of my money, the best I know how, if I'm sitting down to pay the bills and I've already given and there's not enough to pay all the bills, I can get excited then because I know that God is going to work. He's going to be doing something special in my life. And so even those kind of things we can find joy in. It's it might be challenging, but we realize that God's doing something that's going to matter forever.
Yeah, and there's definitely been times in my life, and I just turned 31, but in my 30 years of living and, probably 15 years of work force, if you will, where I made all different kinds of money increments, right? And I've been blessed in many ways, and I've tried to follow God's promises in all of those ways, and obviously I've had shortcomings, but I've also had successes. I've turned down raises, trusting that God would bless me for making choices for Him. All this, you start looking at all of it together. And I'm not here to talk about my successes and how God's worked there, but there's different times where I might have considered myself to be better off than others financially.
Sure.
And one of the things you talked about was being happy to spend your money. And I have a really quick story I'll just share with everybody, is I went through the Dave Ramsey financial course that we provided here at Life Source Church. And one of the things they spoke to is to save an emergency fund. And he says to start off with saving $1,000. Now, for the average person, that sounds like a pretty big hurdle, especially if you're living paycheck to paycheck. And where I was at that point was pretty tough. But we started saving, me and my wife, and we saved up and we hit the $1,000 mark. And we held it there, and there was very many times it helped us out. But there's one time that stands out to me. My car broke down on the side of the highway. It was kind of cold like it's been this last couple of days, really cold. My family was with me, and we got it towed to the mechanic, and they said it's going to cost like $950, something, And I thought to myself, well, we have $1,000, and I had mixed feelings.
Sure.
I was happy that God had got us to a place where we could spend that money to fix my car. and I didn't have to go in debt to take out loans or anything. But so I can get the balance between being happy to spend on something you didn't necessarily want to. God provided it.
Right.
So that's really neat.
Well, I think it does come down at that point. Something we talked about is that if God leads us into a place where money that we think we need for something is going away, that he's the one who provided it to begin with. And so he can provide it again. So there's an emergency fund, right? God can provide that again. And sometimes he lets us experience not having enough so that we will remember to trust in him and not to love our money. But yeah, I think that even those hardest of places, we can say, okay, God, you're in charge here. I'm trusting you. And we can begin to find joy in that, even that.
Right. And one of the other things you talked about in your sermon was, and I thought this was really interesting, especially with where we're at with the whole political race right now, you know, the presidential campaigns that are going on. And so money's talked about a lot, you know, equality pay, as well as the people who are making a whole bunch should be helping the people who aren't. And regardless of your political opinion, one of the points or the statistics you made today on what is rich, what is being rich, and I think you started your sermon off this way, and I think it stood out to me that you said if you make combined, whether it's with your wife or spouse, or it includes your compensation, whether it's vehicles or health care, whatever is provided, when you put it together, if you make $50,000 a year, that you're in the top
1/3 of 1%.
Yeah, top 1/3. And so of 1%.
That's right.
At first, I thought you might have stopped there, top 1/3, and I thought that sounded about right.
Top 1/3 of 1% in the world.
Yeah, so I mean, it's kind of doesn't really beg to be asked, but then what is the difference between rich and not? If it seems like everybody we know then is probably in the top percent at least.
Right. Well, we're comparing ourselves, right, in the with the people around us in the culture in which we live, and that's real. We can't escape that. But we shouldn't be comparing ourselves to each other that way anyway, right? It's where am I at with what God has given me, what he wants me to do. And I think that, to be honest with you, sometimes having more money makes this whole stewardship a greater challenge. People who don't have much money, it's pretty simple, right? They just give to God and they do with what they got and that's it. Where sometimes we get more money and then we start feeling a sense of entitlement and, well, I can't give this up. What do you mean I can't do that? And we kind of miss the point. But the idea is that godliness or contentment, you know, is with godliness is great gain. And so when we're content with what God has provided us, then once again, that puts us in a place. See, we're viewing money the way God intends for us to view it. And my contentment doesn't come from how much money I have or don't have. My contentment comes from being faithful to God in those things. And so when I'm faithful to God in those things, it changes my whole perspective on it.
And you talked a little bit about security, like not finding your security in our money. And it really makes sense, but I think a lot of us really struggle with that because, and you can put it into perspective, especially coming out of what seemed to be everybody was losing their jobs over the past couple of years. And obviously that's not a fun and good time. We're not rejoicing over that. But I think a lot of people felt really, really overwhelmed and insecure with the idea of where's the money going to come from? Right. And so I just bring that up because I feel like we don't want to find our security in the money.
Well, absolutely.
But I think we all struggle with it, is my point. Tell somebody they're losing their job tomorrow, and what is the first thing they probably think about is, where am I going to get my money from?
Sure, and I get that. But I think what happens, what we find out is that when all of a sudden we find out we're losing our job, it reveals whether or not our security is in that money. It's normal to be challenged, say, wow, where's the money going to come from? But if you've already, and that's what today's sermon was about, or Sunday's sermon was about, and what we're trying to talk about is getting to the place where we are day in, day out, living by, looking at money the way God says and using it the way God says, so that when that time comes, sure, as human beings, we have that initial, right? But then we say, but I know God. I know what he said. He's been faithful. He's going to be faithful now. And that's, boy, what a huge difference that is to have that security.
And we'll be wrapping up here in just a minute. But one thing I thought about is a question is, what does God see as probably one of the more enjoyable ways for us to use our money? And I can speak from experience. We just got our giving report back from the church, which is really cool. If you're listening online or viewing us on YouTube, be sure to grab your giving report if you've been giving. You can check it out. And why I bring this up is not to say that I was necessarily surprised by how much I gave, because I'm not here to talk about that, but it was to look at it and say, compared to what I make and what I gave, God is faithful. And to look at it and go, it's an enjoyable thing to even look back on.
Right.
And that can be true for anybody, just like the story in the Bible, the lady who gave a little bit,
right.
but it was all she had, Well,
I think that's, we haven't talked about giving much yet, but that's one of the real keys of giving. Why it's so important is because it puts us in that place to know and understand that God does take care of us, because we're giving away, in the eyes of the world, a significant amount of money. But God takes care of us, so
Yeah.
we've already learned that lesson.
Right. So let's wrap up today. Is there anything you want to tell us about the coming podcast?
Just the couple more podcasts here. We're going to have Drew Langren and Dave Langren. They'll be here taking Matt's place. And we're just going to talk about some more issues related to money, not directly from the sermon. And then hopefully, if all goes well on Friday, we're going to have a testimony from one of the families in our church about how God has worked in their lives in the area of finances.
All right, guys, thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you later. I won't be here tomorrow, but Drew will be taking my spot tomorrow morning, Wednesday. So have a good day, and we'll catch up later.